begun or not. A very good evening to all the attendees and a very warm welcome to this webinar. Before I hand over the session to our moderator, Mr. Sonal Verma from Dhir Dhir Associates, here's a brief introduction. The Great Indian ESG Ride at General Counsel's new mandate. Dhir Dhir Associates, our knowledge partners for this particular initiative, is a leading full-service law firm in India, serving as a single-window legal and regulatory advisor globally. It has offices in New Delhi, Mumbai, Hyderabad, and a representative office in Japan. The firm's areas of practice include restructuring and insolvency, corporate commercial advisory and M&A, real estate, banking and finance, dispute resolution, capital markets, infrastructure and energy, environmental, social, and governance, IPR, technology, media and telecommunications, employment law, and consumer law. And now, the moderator for the day, Sonal Verma, partner and global leader, markets and strategy, Dhir Dhir Associates. Sonal is well acclaimed for his work in regulatory and compliance programs over the last decade. He had in the past worked with 1,800 plus clients in India and 61 other countries globally. He's worked with the top 3 unicorns and many Fortune 500 companies. His clients have been across different industries, with automotive and OEMs, pharma and life sciences, manufacturing, chemical industry, BFSI, infrastructure and utilities, including state-owned PSUs, e-commerce and fintech companies, and various other diversified activities. Sonal leads the first ESG practice in India. This is a dedicated desk that the firm has set up recently. With his crossroad working with business and laws, he brings advice and technology for effective change management in the journey of ESG. Sonal Verma, thank you so much for being the moderator for the session today. Lex Witness is extremely delighted for having you today. Over to you, Mr. Sonal. Sonal, can you please unmute yourself? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Akshay and Lex Witness, the entire team, for that very kind introduction and getting all of us together on this wonderful panel, the Great Indian ESG Ride, General Counsel's new mandate. So I'm very lucky to have some of the powerful speakers on environment, social, and governance. I would quickly introduce one by one each one of them, and we can get started. So we have got with us here Erika Percival. She is founder and CEO of Beyond Governance, an award-winning London-based governance consultancy that takes a fresh approach to good governance and the efficiency benefits it can bring to organizations. She fast-tracked her career to become one of the UK's youngest FTSE 250 board governance advisors at age of 32. After an in-house career working in FTSE listed businesses, she understands how to implement good governance, that there is no one-size-fits-all solution, and that a holistic approach is key to success. In her career, she has experienced many challenging boardroom and governance situations which have honed her skills and enabled her to bring practical support and advice to her clients. So Erika Percival, she is there with us. Next we have got with us is our Zameer Nathani, Senior Vice President and General Counsel, UFO Moviez. Zameer Nathani is an LLB, LLM with his specialization subjects being civil, corporate, criminal, customs, international laws, UN, and WTO. He also has a PhD from Harvard Business School, Executive MBA from NMIMS, US IP laws from Stanford University, intellectual property rights and ADR certifications from WIPO, United Nations, private equity certification from London Business School, and M&A from Harvard Business School. He is presently working as Senior Vice President and General Counsel with UFO Moviez India Limited. Prior joining to UFO Moviez India Limited, he has worked as Associate Vice President with Reliance Entertainment, Head Legal with Balaji Telefilms, and Director Legal at Raymond. So Zameer is there with us. And we have power speaker, another power speaker, Amber Gupta, who is Head Corporate Legal, CS and Compliance Officer at Aditya Birla Capital. Is currently heading those verticals of corporate legal, company secretary, and is the compliance officer. Earlier, he was working as head legal and company secretary of Aditya Birla Sun Life Insurance. In his previous role, he was responsible for implementing, strengthening, and monitoring of legal compliance secretarial framework for the broking and wealth management businesses. He has closely worked with the Chief Risk Compliance Officer at Aditya Birla Financial Services Group in implementing key legal compliance perspectives for the organization. Amber has over 19 years of work experience in the field of legal compliance and secretarial functions, encompassing corporate laws, securities laws, capital market, banking, and NBFC regulations. Thanks, Amber, to join us today. And we have with us today the Vice President Legal of SoftBank Energy, which is part of the SoftBank Group, Mr. Tagore Yaragorla. Tagore is currently overseeing the legal function at SoftBank Energy, where he is responsible for the legal function, including transaction, regulatory, litigation, and business advisory. Having overall 17 years of post-qualification experiences in legal, including 3 years in regular practice and 14 years in corporate legal. He has expertise in transaction, legal, litigation, regulatory, and compliance management. Great to have you, Tagore. So it's a very power-packed group out here. We are having the best people who would be able to provide their insights and experiences in this journey of ESG. Before I hand over to the panelists, just try to take up one very aspect, the first very aspect of the whole discussion today, that how ESG is something which is becoming so much important for the Indian companies, the role what the general counsels would be putting in. And if we are tracking what is happening globally, and even with both the stock exchanges in India trying to put up indexes around ESG, we have got some statistics also I will be showcasing that it's come to the forefront, especially I would say in January 2021 when the SEBI chief talked about a possible guidelines or a circular coming on ESG for the listed companies. The perspective post the COVID has really every business house has been talking about sustainable businesses. It's not just about the shareholders, it's about all the stakeholders. And if we see it has to be a collaborative effort where the GC would become very important, as globally, when we talk about environment, social governance, there are all these huge bodies having n number of principles, whether we take up the UN SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals, or we talk about the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, the TCFD. We talk about the GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative, the Equator Principles, the principles coming on ESG from IFC. And there are many more bodies who are continuously working, benchmarking with quantitative and qualitative data that how do we survive the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. So just to put things in perspective, I think statistics helps us all. And if we see India's role on ESG, we're going in the right direction and definitely things can be fastened up. And we would just see, there was a survey lately run by Lex Witness itself, and I would just be sharing my screen briefly. Is it visible? Zameer? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we just saw this great survey being done. And that it has to be a collaborative approach, and GCs will play a major role. This is simple quantitative data as fresh as February 2021. And if we see the whole evolution, thanks to Kofi Annan, I think 2005, the ball started rolling, and in 15 years, we have seen lots of things happening, and I'm very sure I could put more such charts with in which year, what more in details happened. But some of these very important things did happen. And India has been very committed on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the commitment towards the Paris Agreement on climate change. And we have seen that commitment coming directly from our Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi. And we have done a huge work from 2015 to 2020 in that regards. Statistics would speak on its own. And if we see in November 2020, the Chancellor Exchequer in UK, Rishi Sunak, he made a very bold statement that by 2025, most of the UK businesses would have to align themselves to the TCFD, that recommendations of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. And already from Jan 2021, the premium listed companies have started taking actions, and it's a huge development from the ESG perspective. When the government gets in, some of the leading countries are taking it from the front. And if we see all the success which can be seen in numbers at the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, that has really pushed decision makers across the globe, the stock exchanges across the globe, that yes, it's not just on paper and a tick box thing. We need it for the environment, for the social cohesion, the governance parameters, all have to work in together. Then only we would be able to get through things. And for India, definitely ESG is very important. And if we see on each of the aspects, we can go for an hour each and still there will be less time. So I just thought to put it at one place. Now, supply chain management is becoming so important for Indian companies in the global map of doing business. We are currently seeing all what is happening with COVID-19 vaccines, and the way Indian companies have become an important part in the supply chain management there. And definitely with being ESG aligned, it's just not about 20 tasks which need to be ticked out. To be very honest, it's all a concept. We would need to move from a tick box to key performance indicators based on different global principles, and make sure as GCs, as legal counsels, that companies are adhering to the local laws at the same point of time. And that would be key. Now, as I said, India's commitment to Paris Agreement 2015, if you see the numbers, not looking bad at all. And India is, I think, in the top 5-10 countries in its alignment to the Paris commitment. And till 2030, I'm very sure India, under the current leadership, will be able to fulfill or maybe exceed it. And very good part was this year's budget. Again, not very old. I think a month before, when our finance minister, Ms. Nirmala Sitharaman, made clear that the pillars of the budget would be environment, sustainability, governance. And these were the 6 pillars, if we read the budget well, which comes out, which stands to the principles of ESG. And if we see some of the government programs, I think things have been done from 2015 to date. And these are long-run programs which are showing its results with every passing year. and wouldn't take much time because I know I have to, we have got to hear lots from our esteemed panelists. Just a quick assessment on the TCFD based on the annual reports which were filed in last year. So this report was of October 2020. And if we see the red markings on governance, strategy, risk management, metrics, and targets, there's lots to be done. And I think the legal community will definitely be a very important collaborator in making their respective organizations take up the top position. So I would request, I would just stop sharing and we will start with the panelists. And a quick thing for all the attendees, there would be, after every speaker's thought process, what we hear, there would be a short poll of a couple of questions or maybe a single question, which has got no bearing to what the speakers have said. They would be on general aspects of ESG to keep everyone involved during this whole 60-90 minutes duration. And at the just before we start the Q&A, we have got with us an esteemed lawyer who has been working on some of the policies and the legislation on ESG in the European Union, to also give his inputs on some new things which would be coming up and would impact the Indian businesses. So that would be the flow we'll keep. So we have Erika Percival joining us from London. Good morning in your standard time. And it's a great delight, Erika, that you came over to give your experience of what things on governance and other aspects happening in the boardrooms in UK for everyone to get a better insight. All over to you.
Thank you very much, Sonal. Yeah, so a couple of things to kind of build on what you said, Sonal, about the global ESG kind of movement. So within the UK, there's definitely quite mixed views on ESG, not necessarily on its importance, but more on how it's implemented. So some companies are still very much of the view that it's a tick box exercise at the moment, but obviously that's starting to change. But there are also those other businesses that are looking at their ESG strategy, aligning it with their business model, and then moving that forward as one complete unit, which obviously brings with it a number of benefits, driving in the same direction. The ESG strategy and the business model for the organization is bound to bring those kind of business efficiencies, and then you get true integration of ESG, which is obviously where we want things to be. So this is all starting in the UK. It's very much behind closed doors. The reporting season with annual reports in 2021, so this year, will hopefully reveal more. But I will give a few insights into the sorts of things that are being discussed at the moment in kind of boardrooms in the UK. So I think for those organisations that are championing ESG and they buy into it, then there's definitely a top-down approach. So that kind of ESG strategy and that sort of piece is filtering from the boardrooms right the way through the organisation. It's becoming embedded in the hearts and minds of those people that work within the organisation, but also the stakeholders that business touches. And then I think looking beyond that, I think there are some challenges that those boardrooms or companies themselves could well be facing. I think it can be quite easy for people to kind of look at it as a tick box exercise. We had one kind of conversation going slightly off piste recently with a company that they set up an event, a sustainable event as they deemed it. They'd ordered bamboo straws for the drinks for this particular event, and it wasn't until the actual event that they kind of thought, oh, hang on a minute, these are covered in single-use plastic. And it's that sort of thing that kind of can trip companies up, because they try and do the right thing, but they only go so far and think, oh, the bamboo straws, that was good enough. But actually, it's the next step of that. And that is an illustration, I suppose, of how I think companies need to just look a little bit beyond, because you can quite easily trip yourself up. I think that that obviously can damage reputations of companies as a result of trying to do good, but actually not really getting there. And then it obviously all unwinds and people start realizing that actually it's superficial and it's not true, it's not real. What we see in the UK, I suppose, on the outside, the annual report is obviously one of those disclosures that is external. ESG factors are starting to come into that reporting cycle. Some companies are setting up board level ESG committees. There are starting to get departments.
Very interesting.
Yes, absolutely. We're starting to get departments that ESG focused, or single hires of people that then are looking to build on that and perhaps create a whole department that focuses on ESG, but they're there scoping at the moment to what that team might actually look like. So they're putting some real money behind it. And I think that those that are the real kind of front runners are difficult to identify at the moment, because a lot of it's behind closed doors. And the other thing is that you can't yet see those people that are acting out of a sense of duty and those people who are properly embedding it in their organization. But that will obviously become very clear that as time passes and as we kind of see what level of buy-in these companies have to their ESG strategy. Within the UK, we've had a massive boom actually recently on a particular certification called B Corporation. So that has been running for a number of years. It's something that is international, and that kind of business applies for certification, and they need to be able to show that they balance profit and purpose. And there's been a lot of conversations on social media about the people that have gone for that certification and got it, and that's kind of driving this momentum of discussion around the ESG topic for even those unlisted businesses. So I think that's really good. I think that when we look at ESG in the whole, I think companies are looking at the G in the kind of way of how do we actually get this to work on the ground? How do we implement it into our policies and processes? So you can do the E and the S, but without the G, nothing happens. They're just ideas.
It will fall apart. It will just fall apart then. All the effort.
Absolutely. And that's what we're seeing. And I think that governance goes beyond just the kind of superficial strategy. It needs to be from the board decision making through to embedding it in the strategy, to kind of looking at executive director rewards, for instance, and being able to move that forward. So on that kind of ESG metrics board remuneration piece, that is something that UK companies are now focused on. So they're looking at how they can incentivize or link ESG metrics with their kind of incentivized remuneration for their CEOs, CFOs. There's obviously a few gaps there, because we haven't yet seen what those metrics look like or what those targets look like, but investors are really interested in this area, and it's something that they are keen to see, assuming that it's embedded in a proper way. So they are saying that the ESG metrics need to include proper performance targets, and they need to be clearly linked to strategy. They need to be quantifiable, and the weighting of those performance related pay should favour the financial and business risk-based performance measures, not just ESG. So for instance, setting up an ESG strategy wouldn't be a sufficient target for the CEO. It would be perhaps something to do with environmental targets or environmental impact, something that is actually going to change the course of that company, not just a document that hopefully will be embedded in the system.
So it's quantitative and qualitative
absolutely
parameters and the key performance indicators.
Absolutely, Sonal, that's right. And those companies are doing that, some of them for their own benefit, but largely there is a lot of noise in the UK at the moment around stakeholders. There's a lot of noise around stakeholders kind of raising their voices and saying this isn't right, we don't want this to happen. And mass media, so social media and the newspapers are really picking up on this, and sometimes it's used as a force for good, so they will highlight those companies that are doing a great job, and other times it's used as a force for pulling out those people that have, I don't know, got those bamboo straws that are coated in single-use plastic. Is something that could well in a large company get put across mass media, because it's one of those, oh, they're trying but they're not doing a good enough job. So
social media now being so active globally, Twitter handles and all of it.
absolutely.
Huge reputational damage.
Massive reputational damage, absolutely. So I suppose looking a little bit beyond the companies, just some of the kind of wider ESG bits, ESG funds, like investment funds, have definitely risen. There are lots of them about. Companies that are investment fund managers feel that they need to have an ESG fund. Scrupulous, I suppose, investors are kind of questioning what metrics they're using to distinguish those ESG companies, because you could arguably have a company that is carbon neutral, but they are producing single-use plastic or a toxic substance. So they may well be deemed high on the ESG ratings, but are they genuinely an ESG kind of company?
It have one eco label, but on the other things, it could be just a greenwashing.
Absolutely. And that greenwashing is something that the UK generally and the UK population and companies are concerned about, and something that's kind of moving forwards. We have lots of ratings agencies again on ESG, but it's very difficult. There's a lack of consistency, there's lack of subjectivity, and those ratings agencies don't necessarily follow a standard metric. So you have to look at what those metrics are in order to be able to understand what that rating agency is really saying. And we've had a number of different, I suppose, case studies that have happened over the course of the last maybe 6 to 12 months that have been particularly pertinent. So BlackRock, multinational investment corporation, have said that they will vote against or vote down people that don't comply with the women on boards kind of requirements within the UK. We've had a large listed organisation, a FTSE 100 listed organisation that delivers food, so like takeaway food from a restaurant that delivered to your home, and they were in the news about paying by the job and not by the hour, because they said that that was unethical. So that's come to light. We've had lots of kind of issues as well around 0 hours contracts and people raising that. We've got pension funds that are very much concerned about kind of ESG standards, and they are raising eyebrows and saying that they will kind of divest their investments in some of those. Scottish Widows, for instance, in November divested nearly £500 million from companies who failed to meet ESG standards in accordance with their new exclusions policy.
I think one aspect which I think we can have another 1 hour on it is the whole new concept on the 0 hour contracts to promote the safeguarding of the gig and the platform workers.
Absolutely.
I think that's a great development I noticed which happened during the COVID times, that let's at least give some rights through a piece of contract to the platform workers. They are making up huge numbers and they went out taking all the risk during the COVID times. So I think that was something, a great learning from UK.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose the other thing that we have been doing in the UK for quite some time, so since October 2015, so 6 years now, we've had to report, depending on the size of the company, but the listed companies have now, and smaller companies are now having to disclose their supply chain sustainability. So modern slavery transparency statement has to be produced and put up on the websites and those sorts of things. So
yeah, that came, I think, last week or something.
Yes, so it's definitely evolving. And as you said, Sonal, the UK government is kind of continuing to work on ESG regulatory frameworks, and the Chancellor has kind of said they've got a desire to make London the green finance capital of the world. So watch this space with what that means and what kind of comes out of that. And as you say, there are also EU regulations that the UK, following Brexit, isn't going to adopt in kind of verbatim, but there are lots of conversations because there's a serious overlap between EU and UK companies and where people do business. And as a result, without keeping up with the EU, we will fall behind. And that's definitely not somewhere where the UK wants to be. Hopefully that's a good bit of a summary, Sonal, for you on the UK.
Yeah, I think that was great to hear your views around things. So great, I would say. Yeah, so I suppose we move on to the next speaker today. And I think with the Lex Witness team would just put quickly some polls around on some ESG questions. So just expand. Perfect. I think everyone, another 10 seconds, please vote in onto. Yes, thanks. I think we now move in on a very important topic, which Zameer would be talking about, would be the role and oversight of investors, board members, and other people with respect to ESG disclosures. And with Zameer's varied experience in India and on the global front, I think, Zameer, we all looking eager to hear you.
Right. Thank you very much to you and Lex Witness. I think stakeholders are the most important part. So whenever we decide on any ESG policy, it's all about stakeholders. So you speak about customers, you speak about employees, you speak about board members, shareholders, and other stakeholders who are there available with you, your vendors, subcontractors, etc. I think that's a very important, one of the important components, because when you speak about stakeholders, it's not just about ESG ratings, which are, or a compliance mechanism, is not particularly towards one direction. It speaks about community impact. It speaks about labor standards, shareholders' right, risk management, tax transparency, audit compliance, pollution, resource use, climate change, ecological footprint, health and safety standards, and customer responsibility, of course. So that's what is the total area of ESG, environment, social, and governance we are talking about. Just to give a reflection and why this is becoming very important for all the stakeholders, before going to the individual stakeholders and what is the case and the benefits which lie following the ESG compliance guidelines. Just on certain numbers, if you see, the net flow of ESG funds available to US investors in 2019 have skyrocketed to about 20 billion, which is nearly 4 times the previous annual record set in 2018. So the earlier record was about 4 billion, and it has now become 20.6 billion in 2019. While ESG funds in Europe have also attracted inflow of about $132 billion in 2019. More than 70% of funds focused on ESG investments outperformed their counterpart in the first 4 months of 2020. Nearly 60% of the ESG funds outperformed the wider market over the past decade. Consumers and investors are placing a growing value on ESG, and industry leaders have responded in a number of ways, including issuing comprehensive sustainability reports and expanding ESG disclosures in their annual reports. If you visit the website of Infosys is a carbon neutral company. They have made a policy on ESG, which is available on their website, and the ESG vision for 2030. Imagine we are talking about 10 years down the line. That's the importance which has been now factored into. Now, why is this compliance becoming globally so important? Number one, why is it very focused? Why is it required? In 2018, even the government of India started speaking on the guidelines with respect to ESG. There is a concentrated focus also in India because there were a number of incidents which happened which have reflected the importance of it. All right. you have Petrobras, you have Enron, you have Banco Espirito Santo, you have BP, you have Toshiba, where governance risk has proved costly for the investors. If we speak about environmental risk, the biggest example I can give you is the health and safety records of BP in the run-up of the Gulf of Mexico oil spill, which had happened in 2010. These are all the ingredients which has now led to a policy and the ESG compliance, which is now becoming a global norm. The ongoing drought in California in 2014-15 also emphasized the need to consider the water stress, which is a prominent ESG issue. All right. Giving other examples of about South African mining company Lonmin, it basically experienced on the financial performance because there were issues on the social issues with respect to the labor relations. So we have seen environment, we have seen labor here. There is also a growing realization that whether motivated by economic values or moral values, ESG issues are relevant for all long-term investors. Investors are now looking out for companies which are ESG compliant, which means they have factored out ESG as one of the important portfolio, and therefore these are long-term sustainable companies. If you see the ESG issues which have been come up is about scarcity of natural resource, changing demographic, which is happening, climate change, etc., which has all been factored. Now, with this numbers and specific about what ESG is addressing about climate change, customers, stakeholders, board of directors, women representations, etc., I now go to the individual stakeholders. The impact of investor influence strategy. An examination of private engagement conducted by a fund manager, Herms, demonstrated financial outperformance associated with investors' engagement rather than stock picking, which is one of the components of ESG, where you have investor engagement. An analysis of stock performance of 188 companies placed on the focus list of ESG engagement by California Public Employees Retirement System found that these companies perform significantly better than their peers, 15.27% above Russell 100 index for over 14-year period. Evidence from collaborative dialogue involving 225 investment organizations over a period till 2017 shows that there is a successful engagement that has occurred. Target companies experience improved profitability. Research from Harvard Business School indicates that filing shareholder proposals is effective at improving the performance of the company on the focal ESG issue. Walmart Sustainability Expo, which started in 2014, is now concentrating on the ESG aspect, which has resulted $231 million saved by means of efficient waste management and recycling. This is from an investment angle. Now, what are the drivers for the success of the companies? When you speak about shareholders, investors have a range of strategy at their disposal to engage in corporate management and communicate their views on corporate ESG risk, which can be averse to the company. Collaborative dialogues, collaborative investor dialogues with companies take many forums, and this is what ESG also factors into it. One of the examples which we have seen is a collective mechanism of investors to aggregate their asset in support of the annual request of disclosure by largest publicly listed companies. BP Deepwater Horizon 2010 oil spill Gulf of Mexico is a prominent example to it, which then brought into astute ESG investors would like to have to avoid investing in BP at the time of the oil spill. So these are all the impact which are happening. When we speak about shareholders proposal, there is an ability to file shareholders proposal on ESG issues in an important legal mechanism for investors, enabling them to formally submit a recommendation for action to a company or its board of directors. One of the examples I can give you is about lobbying disclosure. More than 150 companies in the S&P 100 in United States have committed to disclosure and board oversight on the political spending. Proxy access and board diversity, most notably the New York City Comptroller has asked companies to make the right of investors to nominate directors on the company's proxy ballot a market standard. These are all the steps which have been taken towards the ESG compliance. Even proxy voting exercising is now becoming a formal mechanism. One of the examples I can give you about ExxonMobil, in 2017, an organization shares and to GCC mobilized large asset owners to provide pre-declaration of support for proposal with ExxonMobil, asking the company to conduct a 2-degree scenario analysis. This pre-declaration of support created motivation among asset managers to support the proposal, ultimately achieving a 62% of shareholders voting in support of the proposals for ExxonMobil, including Vanguard, BlackRocks of the world. The fourth aspect I want to stress is on the public policy engagement. Now, investors can also engage in public policy at various stages while they're making public policy process. They should align long-term incentives for company to take action on the ESG issue. They should correct market failures that investors become aware of through their interactions with many companies. One of the examples is 390 investors representing more than USD 22 trillion in asset issued a letter urging government of the G20 nations to support and implement the Paris Climate Agreement. Climate change is one of the aspects of the ESG compliance. There were a number of filings which took place even at the SEC level in United States, and therefore the movement is very wide enough. And just to sum up on these things which are going on from a compliance point of view, from a stakeholders point of view, where you have customers, shareholders, board of directors, representations there. The role of the investor network is also becoming very important. Board representations, including women board representations, which are there. If you see recent report of JP Morgan, the CEO of the company, Jamie Dimon, one of the authority in the financial market, has disclosed that 40% of the board members are women board members on JP Morgan. And this reflects the importance of the ESG adaptation and compliance. Therefore, just to sum up, as ESG-minded business practices gain more traction, investor firms are increasingly tracking their performance. Now, financial services such as JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs have published annual reports that extensively now review ESG approaches and the bottom line results. And that shows that how important this is for all the stakeholders of the company, as well as for the prospective investors who now looks the company from an ESG compliance point of view. That's my submission, Sonal. Thank you very much.
This is, Zameer, very informative for everyone attending today, that there is so much, you say, responsibility on different stakeholders to make this happen. And if it happens, it's for the whole good of the organization and the ecosystem. It would be just fantastic. And the last point which you said with the global examples, I would get Amber to talk on the business responsibility reporting and sustainability in India, because in India, most of the time, CSR means sustainability. Is that the case? And Amber has been into that compliance officer's role also. But before we move there, there is again the next set of polls from Lex Witness. So if we could have the polls quickly before, yes, it's up on everyone's screen. Another 10 seconds.
I hope you're also allowed to submit our votes.
Yeah. Yes, so fine. We can close the poll and we can, yeah, see if you could. I think people do accept that the concept of sustainable finance and impact investment, it's there. And yes, Amber, we waiting to hear from you the things around sustainability, BRR. And yes, please.
Thank you very much for the introduction and giving the opportunity to be here and share my
I
thoughts.
think
Thank you, Zameer, for
we are hearing a bit low voice.
Is this better?
Yeah,
Is this
it's
better?
a bit better. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's better.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Zameer, for providing great insights on some of the global perspective and how it is coming out. In India, when we talk about Indian context we all know that business responsibility report submission is something which is not made mandatory for all companies. Of course, SEBI has taken initiatives and certain efforts to make it mandatory for top 1,000 listed companies in India based on a market capitalization. So that has been amended and added under the regulation 34 of the LODR regulations. So as of now, it is applicable for top 1,000 listed companies, and also those which are listed on MSC exchanges may include this report on a voluntary basis. So that's how the regulatory frameworks as of now we stand. Of course, there is no such requirement of publishing any kind of a sustainability report. But before I go get into that, a bit of
Your voice
understanding on
fell,
the.
Amber. Yeah.
Is this better?
Yeah,
Is
yeah,
better? Yeah. And before I get into more on the sustainability part, I think it's also critical to understand the role of a business responsibility report, the background, and if you do the key sections which BRR report talks about, it's about, of course, the first one is about it has got 5 sections, and the section A is all about your general information about the company, the sector you are operating, the products and services. Part B is on the financial information. Section C is something which is about BR initiatives which are taken at the subsidiary and the supply chain partner, and this is something which reflects the importance of business responsibility, that you are not only responsible and related to what you are operating, but also how you are engaging with your partners, your subsidiaries, and how the entire value chain proposition is working. And then section D is all about your board structure, details on your policies and performance and all those things. But look at section E. Section C is what is the principal wise performance against which you are going to report, and it requires you to assess performance against 9 principles which were envisaged under the National Voluntary Guidelines. So this is a National Voluntary Guidance in 2011, which was issued by Ministry of Corporate Affairs, which forms the basis of these reporting. And as early as in fact in 2019, there was another press release issued by Ministry of Corporate Affairs, re-emphasizing on some of these principles. And these 9 principles forms the basis of your BRR. You can say these are the 9 gems on the which the entire reporting is concerned, and summarizes what Zameer and you also spoke about in your initial survey report, that they should conduct the business in integrity in a manner which is ethical, transparent, and accountable. It should provide goods and services in a manner which is sustainable and safe. It should protect the well-being of its employees and those who are part of the value chain, interests of the promoters, stakeholders, and other shareholders who are part of your business. Respect human rights, protect and restore environment. Then they should also implement and influencing public policy, regulatory policy, so that these are responsible and transparent. uh, Develop practices that provide inclusive growth and development, and should, very important, and should also be doing activities which is kind of promotes consumer welfare in a responsible manner. So if you see all these 9 principles, it's something which is also somewhere leading to the entire ESG framework that we talk about, because all these 9 principles of issued on this responsible conduct national guidelines, voluntary guidelines, kind of is the first steps on the entire issue base of the ESG as we talk about. While in different forms, in different locations, in jurisdiction, it may would have developed in a different formats, but that's the basis on which these are based on. It's also important to understand that some of these are also based on the guiding principles which are adopted in United
Amber
Nations
sir,
and
if you could please keep the mic a bit closer to you.
Amber, you went on mute.
Yes, there's a bit of a technical snag at Amber's end. I think he's trying to reconnect Sonal. Let's wait for 30 seconds.
hello. Is this
Yeah. Now you're
Yes,
on.
yes, now we can
Yeah.
hear you, sir.
Yeah. So so these have become the key drivers, and I will also like to draw your attention and what Zameer also mentioned that not only these voluntary guidelines, but if you look at the provisions of Companies Act, while nothing's been made mandatory, but you look at the duties of the directors, and one of the duties of directors, fiduciary duties, which is there, is to promote the objects of the company for the benefit of its member as a whole and the best interest of the employees, company, shareholder, community, and protection of the environment. It's already there. It is there in that as a duties of the director. So some kind of things are already there in a statutory framework. Then how much you can adopt and how do you demonstrate it is something these principles would definitely look at helpful in this area. And taking clue from these voluntary guidelines, this business responsibility report was issued by SEBI, which was initially applicable for top 500 and got extended to 1,000, 1,000 listed companies. So this is how the overall regulatory framework has, been framed, which the government is looking at it very aggressively. Uh, yes, those companies which are mandatory required, they are doing that. Those who some companies have also adopted voluntarily, reporting of this kind of reporting. Another, which is an interesting thing that you spoke about, which is a subset of the ESG framework, is about the sustainability report, and it is something again which gives a more, you can say, formal framework for implementation of an ESG requirement, which is again flowing for the BRR report, but is more specific on the ESG, covering specifically on the environmental, social, and governance framework. Again, this is not mandatory as of now, and these sustainability report are based on the global reporting initiative, which you also mentioned. And as per the statistics, uh, they more than the Fortune 500 companies, specifically the world 250 largest 250 organization corporation, they are already using these GRI standards in terms of reporting the sustainability reportings. Some of the large groups and some of the businesses in India, which are well renowned, well famous, they are already started reporting. Of course, the formats may differ depending on the sectors which they operate, and depending on what they are doing is something that they report. But there is a encouraging emerging trends which is seen. Some of the large companies like Audi, Volvo Group, they have been reporting this and combining with as part of their financial statement disclosure itself. So there is a
Encouraging for the audience.
yes. So some people are reporting as part of their financial reporting, and some are publishing it later thereafter. But increasingly, there is a trend which is seen, which is the reason I mentioned that there is a need for people also starting publishing along with the financial reporting areas. Now, ESG criteria.
Compliance officer, anything downside of publishing a one-pager ESG in the annual report?
I don't see any. In fact, a lot of we are also keep talking that whether should voluntarily we should start giving that, and some of the organizations have started already giving. As I mentioned that if you give it as part of the financial reporting, it's always good, but you can always give as a voluntary later on, publish on your website, and you can email to your shareholders as additional initiatives. Which Samir mentioned, and you also mentioned that investors are definitely looking out these areas. So now there are agencies who rate companies on the basis of ESG framework, how they're looking at. There are rating agencies who are looking at this. There are specifically investment decisions are taken on the basis of their ESG aspect. There is also a SEBI consultation paper release, if you remember, recently in 2020 August, making that something that BSG framework should now also cover an ESG related disclosures as well. and there are talks to make it mandatory. As of now, it is made voluntarily for the financial year 2021, but it will be made also compulsory from next financial year, from 21-22.
So both the stock exchanges are really putting up good papers around ESG and SCBSE.
No, so as of now, since it is voluntarily for 2021, and it will form part of, as I mentioned, ESG will form part of the BRR report. It will not be a separate report.
Yeah.
It will form part of that particular report. So since it's voluntary, not much, but this year financial reports, when it will be published, especially of large companies, it would be interesting to see that how they are reporting. And post COVID, actually, we have seen a sudden increase in this awareness. And the timing of this report coming in August 2020 is something which is encouraging, because now over a period of time, especially post COVID, this has gained a lot of importance. Because there are talks about community, there are talks about look at the way the corporates have responded. They are voluntarily covering not only their own employees but service at large, community as large in terms of COVID related coverages, health benefits. A lot of initiatives of CSR going in preventive healthcare. Though CSR and sustainability has to be seen separately, not one.
Okay, so CSR is not sustainability. We want to hear that from you.
Definitely not. It's sustainability is much larger, and CSR it's much more focused and specifically related to certain items, which is more at a community that you may operate or a large corporate. ESG definitely also includes your own employees. So, for example, if we talk on a legal aspect, any expenditure that you have made for your employees are not part of your CSR expenditure, right? It is specifically there in the rules that anything that you are doing for your employees are excluded, because it is coming out of your enterprise obligation. All part of your enterprise obligation will come under ESG. So as part of ESG, you can definitely cover your employees, and
for the employees on diversity, equality.
So if some of the corporates who have taken voluntary the vaccination initiatives for your employees, they can very much cover that as part of the ESG initiative. If they are not covering at part of the CSR, which is not permitted, and of course claim business expenditure and those. So this is how the overall scenario looks at it. Of course, there are talks in terms of ESG exchanges and index funds also being launched. But I feel that it's too early for India to look at in those scenarios. But it's an encouraging trend to look at it.
Yeah, but I think when people like all of you talking about it in the industry, I think things are there and they are happening very fast than what we would have thought maybe 5 years before.
In fact, I was speaking to some of the fund managers, and what they indicated that some of the foreign funds, especially they were coming into India, they are asking them about their ESG initiatives. It is coming as part of your due diligence reports. And some of the long-term investment, they are looking at it. So for horizon of 4, 5 years, 10 years, they are benchmarking how they are doing and evolving in the ESG status. This is something very encouraging, and something is institutional investors make it compulsory or a focused area as part of their investment norms. Slowly from voluntary, it will, slowly from being made mandatorily because of regulator, it will move towards, voluntary, and then becomes a normal norm as part of the overall.
It would, I think it will be a part of the new normal life after COVID. I think great insights, Amber, and I would say we would love more to hear. But
Sonal, there's a request from quite a lot of audience members. They could not hear Amber quite clearly. There's a special request that if Amber sir can repeat what he said about the regulation. Amber sir, can you quickly give a quick repeat on what you said about regulation, and then we can move to Tagore.
There was someone who just put in one question.
Amber sir, can you unmute yourself, please?
Is this better now?
Yes, much better.
Yeah. So there's a regulatory process which is there, is that from Companies Act, this is not mandatory. For listed companies, it has been mandatory by SEBI, starting with top 500. And now it has been made compulsory for top 1,000 listed companies in India. The BRR report contains 5 sections. Section A is about general information about the company. Then section B is about financial details. Section C is about your all various BR initiatives that have been taken by subsidiary and your supply chain partners. Section D is all about your board structures, various kinds of policies. And section E is something which is very critical, is to provide an performance on the 9 business responsibility principles which are been envisaged by the national voluntary guidelines issued by Ministry of Corporate Affairs in 2011. And if you see at these kinds of guidelines basically cover the entire gamut of as a responsible citizen, that you are going to cover about your integrity, ethical practices, accountability, your manner of providing services in a sustained manner, what are the steps the company is taking for the well-being of the employees, how they are respecting the and responding to various shareholders, stakeholders, consumer rights, human rights, protection of environment. So those 9 principles basically forms the basis of that particular BRR reporting.
We lost Amber again.
Yeah.
So it is the NVG Guidelines 2019, wherein all the details on the BRR could be looked into. I think Amber would reconnect again, and we could have the next poll before I could have Tagore speak on fantastic thing which we all have been waiting to hear on the role of ESG clauses and investment agreements. So the poll, Lex Witness.
I'm so sorry. I think there's some network issue at my end. So
no worries, Amber. I think that the perspective went very clear on what on BRR you said. And I think we are able now. Yeah, I think the poll is on everyone's screen. Five more seconds. Yeah, I think this is could be one good agenda point to be discussed in the board meetings. As we see, most of people say no. Human rights in the businesses are not being discussed at the board level. So great insights coming from the polls which are being run on the side. Yeah, so we've got now, Tagore, welcome. We all have been wanting to hear from you on the ESG clauses and investments and your perspective as you come from the renewable energy, and SoftBank Energy has done lots of huge big projects. Yes, please, it's all over to you now.
Thanks, Sonal. In fact, the kind of panelists that I'm looking at, the Amber, Zameer, Erika has covered large portion of the regulatory regime in India globally. And Zameer has actually given a right vitamin M, how global funds are actually focusing on the ESG. And today, if you see the analysis, and before going the analysis, sorry, and the attendees, many of the attendees which I have seen the names, that most of them are my seniors, in fact, and some of them are my colleagues, and I respect you all. It shows that how important this ESG is attracting it. In other areas of the legal, jurisprudence is settled, but wherein ESG, this is very fluid when it comes. There is no certainty, interpretation, understanding, and explanation. In one of the questions written, I see that, do we need to focus on the practical requirements or the guidelines that they had given under the business responsibility reports? What would be our core area? There is no certainty. And also the tagline that you have given, that the great Indian ESG ride, a general counsel's new mandate. This is a topic of the hour. When I see this particular topic, Erika is also saying that it is not a tick box item. It is though it is a KPI. This KPI is having the lesser weightage for the respective carriers of the general counsels, but this one is taking us for a toll. This one is actually giving us a sleepless nights. Remaining all we can settle and we can understand. Why it is taking us for a sleepless nights? As Zameer rightly pointed out, that couple of investments, fund houses that are looking into ESG aligned or driven assets in India or globally, many of the investments have been rejected just because of the non-compliance are not aligning to ESG. It is not that the advantage that we are having of the ESG, it is that the disadvantage of non-compliance or not focusing on the ESG is far, far consequential effects on the business in general and risk in specific. When I say risk, particularly in a global scenario, the socialist countries have been driving this ESG concept, whether it is there in the regulation or not. We have been following this. However, the capitalist countries are also have started aligning to ESG. Reason is that post this Paris Agreement, maybe because of this global warming, one of the factors is the climate change. In the climate change, the focus is that the investment, the capital money that they are infusing should also have the responsibility of considering the ESG aligned assets to invest. The moment these investments have started aligning to ESG, the entire focus has started. I'm sure this many of the general councils 15, 20 years back, this concept of social responsibility is one of the KPI or the tick box item for the sake of document. But today it amounts to the criticality of attracting the investments. Why do we need to attract the investment, particularly the assets globally? Domestic finance is not at all sufficient. We will have to focus on the global investments. And there were the days, even for 500 crores, the Indian banks were having consortium to fund 500 crores. Today, globally, there is no limit. We don't need consortium, but we just need ESG focus. And Amber has rightly given all the guidelines, all the regulations.
I think that is very, very educative.
Very good. Those principles are not mandatory. Maybe BSE is insisting for the initially 100, now it is for 1000. For the companies, those who are in top 1000, I think it is not at all required because they have already complied. It is a question for the people or the companies, those who are above 1000, for them to come into this radar. And there are much more mutual funds which are aligned globally.
I was waiting for someone to talk about. Yeah.
Yeah, all global funds, particularly mutual funds, they have the designated funds for the ESG.
In India, we have got almost half a dozen designated funds on ESG now.
Yes, after a dozen, and when you see that their time period is within 2 months, it got invested it, and the investors are keen. Why are they focusing it? If you, if the participants, you know this, and you are all, many of them are much more experienced than me, wherein if you see this, the risk of focusing this ESG or the attracting these investments, people are not looking short-term gains. People are looking for the long-term. If you see the overall portfolio, the long-term investment fund houses are more and majority. What are they looking at? They are looking at two issues primarily. One is having the lesser risk. The second one is the returns. Where are those returns? Returns are more where the risks are less. Where are the risks that are less? Where the companies which are compliance of ESG are aligned to. And Sonal and Erika has rightly covered that COVID. During the COVID times, when you see the performance of these assets globally, companies which are ESG aligned had got better performance than anybody else. I have been seeing that the result of ESG, that why do we need to see this? Is it all, it is not mandatory, it is not at all required, only the promoter is promoting this, pushing this. But today we have experience. When we have started this journey, we started this journey like a marathon. We all felt that it is marathon, let us run at 6 or 7 pace. Within 5-6 kilometers of marathon, it became sprint. And today, everybody is running against time.
I'm seeing these ESG clauses in the investment agreements more often than 5 years before. Tagore?
Yes. Hello?
Yeah, we are able to hear.
Yeah. These ESG sustain, when they are conducting the initial due diligence, remaining all valuation is fixed. The valuation cannot be tweaked or can be tweaked, but it can be justified. But on the ESG, this is more prominent. And the fund houses that are coming are having global presence. When they're having global presence, their risk of entering into the companies which are not having focus on the ESG will be having more expensive risk. So their focus on the ESG, any of the investment agreement that you
What I hear you clearly and the audience hearing, that if you're doing the right alignment on ESG, you might be looking for cheaper funds even.
Of course, I will not say the cheaper funds. I will put it another way. If you have access to the funds, definitely your volume will go up. If your volume is going up, definitely your price will come down. If your price comes down, definitely you would capture the demand and the market of this organization. Is indirectly you capture the market, the volume is in your limits, and automatically returns would go up. People, those who are giving, one of the questions they mentioned that Uber issue during this issue, would they consider as workman? But in India, if you see, it is part of the culture. We are not actually looking ESG as ESG. It is part of our culture, tradition to treat everyone, and the fundamental principles of the constitution is also driving the same concept. And also Amber has rightly covered this BRR, and couple of them if you could look into. The principles that we are following it up are nothing but the regulation which we have been following it up from quite a long time. When I say quite a long time, it's almost from more than 20-25 years we have been following it in every organization. But what are we missing? We are not documenting appropriately. This United Nations Global Compact of these 10 principles, which Amber has covered, and we are protecting the human rights, and we are ensuring that it is not complicit in human rights at all. We talk about migration labor, and every organization knows that they don't hire, and we prefer the local labor. When we prefer local labor,
SoftBank Energy that you move for the local laborers at the sites. That's interesting.
yeah.
The social fabric.
Correct, Sonal. And you see, many of the plants or any manufacturing units are not into the cities. They're all interior places, industrial areas. If you are not integrated into the local, when I say not only hiring the local people, but also to the extent possible, procuring the material that is part of your manufacturing unit that can be used for your project should be from the local procurement to the extent possible. Avoid importing, sorry, avoid importing of this, which we have been doing that. And another principle which you could recall is child labor. We don't encourage, even in normal shop in India, if you see, we are not engaging hiring any child labor. That is part of our ESG concept. And also the gender discrimination. And today, of late, we are seeing that and a couple of professions, particularly in legal, if I don't want to comment this gender discrimination, and there is no gender discrimination. I see many of the girls are working, some of the law firms when I'm seeing that there are more girls than boys. The gender discrimination concept itself has gone up, and encouraging the diffusion of environment friendly technologies, and should work against all corruption. Corruption in India, if you see, many of the countries are having some thresholds, but in India we had never having any threshold. Whether it is a rupee or 10 rupees, your intent is not clear and not good, even a rupee is not permitted. So ESG we have aligned from the beginning. And also Erika is saying that there are social responsibilities, environmental responsibility. But when it comes to the criticality, governance is paramount. It is occupying the highest ratio of the ESG. Why is it required? And we have whistleblower policies, we have POSH, we have anti-bribery rules, policies, how well we are reporting it. And Amber is also good to note that many of the companies have started voluntarily reporting that. When they are reporting voluntarily, is there a risk? I don't think there is a risk. I personally feel that. But to document that, whatever we have been doing, that is important. Yeah, why it is important to document it? You are also covering that the BRR top 100, top 1,000 companies are listing it. But when it comes to the access to the funds for any of the business in India or globally, what are they looking at? There today, the ESG aligned funds are limited, but the future is going to be complete equity is going to be on the ESG alone. I may be exaggerating it, but when you see the analysis, the ratio of the increasing ratio of focusing the ESG is huge. If we don't focus right now, this is the time either we will get more access to the funds or perish.
Thanks, Tagore, for your views. And I know you just overshot, I think, a bit on the time. That's fine. But really good thoughts on how ESG can drive investments and importance in the documentation and the clauses. And I would just ask if Lex Witness could put the next poll up for people to take in. Interesting questions. Does your organization have a ESG charter? Is there a budget allocated for ESG journey in your organization? Give another 10 seconds for some more people to report in. Yeah, that's fine. Thanks. Thanks for the poll. Yes, now just before, I think one important thing which we had, if I have all of in here, during COVID, there has been a tough time, I think, especially on the S part of ESG. We saw that companies discussing that whether even in a work from home policy, number of hours being put at home, what aspects, safety of women at workplace, does it apply even when you're working from home? And there have been enough discussions. In fact, one of the technology companies very nicely, it's big technology consulting company who came up 2 weeks before, caregiver, you say, perspective, and took away the gender aspect during for maternity or a parental leave. So that was a great move and change in policies happening during the COVID times. I would request Erika, Amber, Zameer, Tagore, any particular, a couple of examples if you could give in that during COVID and because of COVID, any particular ground level impacts which you saw happened in your organizations or companies you know about?
Yeah, if I may add.
Yeah, Tagore.
Yeah, particularly during the COVID, this is a high time. One side, government of India has relaxed this lockdown. When I say that we are having access to the office, we are having access to the sites, but the company has given work from home option. We have tried to reduce the interaction between one to another, but the policies have substantially changed. The policies have been remarkably modified than earlier. One is work from home. How many of us can work from home? That is not possible. And at the same time, site, when there is a site, the construction activities are taking place during COVID and during lockdown, during curfew, during section 144, only 4 people should gather. But inside any of the site, if you see minimum 50, 100 workers will be working up, and carrying those 50 workers, I will not be in a position to carry 10 guys in same transport. So this taking care, welfare, keeping them within the site and giving facilities within the facilities, not discriminating the labor or the employees. These are all have started actually implementing the ESG with true spirit.
That's good. I think some due to the COVID impact, because that was one important agenda point. Zameer, any particular examples you could think about that because of COVID? Yeah.
I think companies really adopted, I mean, though they may not be having a specific requirement on ESG, but I think most of the companies adopted on the ESG levels. But, two examples I would give you. One is that the movement on ESG with reference to even employee treatment started in 2019 also, when in United States, if you remember, there was a proposal by 181 CEOs in US at a business roundtable where they signed statement on the purpose of a corporation. It was very much in the news. 181 CEOs committed to leading their companies for the benefit of all the stakeholders. Now, the COVID-19 crisis is likely to accelerate this shift from shareholders' capitalism to stakeholders' capitalism, as we say, where companies are expected to create long-term value, not only for the shareholder, but also for other stakeholders, including companies, employees, wider society, and the planet. More than ever, investors expect companies to play their part now in addressing ESG issues such as climate change, labor standards, human rights. While the pandemic continues, in fact, there is a statistics which is available that when the pandemic started, companies with better ESG ratings have outperformed broader market during the downturn. There's a chart of MSCI ESG equity indexes, which has actually outperformed the broader market index over the 4 months up to 30th April 2020, as well as in the longer period while we were there already in the pandemic, which also makes a point that ESG compliant companies, which were looking into climate change, labor standards, employee rights, etc., were more favorably operated because of their ESG compliance and ratings than the other companies, which makes it a point that companies should adopt ESG as early as possible. If COVID situation is been existing and companies have outperformed in that, it is something to thought about and to be adapted as fast as possible. That's my preaching about it. Thank you.
Fantastic insights on the ground, how even with COVID and companies on the ESG. Amber, any particular case studies, examples you want to share during these trying times?
Just one thing I wanted to add is that there is a guidance note also given by Bombay Stock Exchange on the reporting of ESG, and people can download it. You want to just put it up. And there they have listed out some of the requirements. And it's a good guidance note just for the information of the participant. They can download from the BSC.
Yeah. Great. Thanks for all the attendees.
Maybe I can send it to Akshay and he can also circulate it separately.
In fact, Sonal, if you see CEOs of some companies vouching for this for ESG very much. In fact, see BP oil spill, Volkswagen emission scandal which happened. These are all the examples which we have seen where, ESG grew out of those philosophies. And even today, it's become an investment analysis where, your energy efficiency, carbon footprint, greenhouse gas, deforestation, biodiversity, or when you consider the S portion of it, it's about labor standards, workplace board diversity. When you consider G, governance factor, it's about board composition, strategic sustainability, executive compensation, bribery, corruption. So, in the letter of 2018, the BlackRock chairman, Larry Fink, actually said about ESG, and he said the society is demanding that companies serve a social purpose to prosper over time, every company must not only deliver financial performance, but also show that how it makes a positive contribution to society. Companies must benefit of all their stakeholders, including shareholders, employees, customers, and community. Yeah. So.
Yeah, that's a good definition, Zameer.
Still
You
now,
take the definition beyond the stakeholders, including the customers and the consumer.
That makes a huge difference.
Yeah, yeah.
So, but see, if you see one thing, if you see one of these, some of these things are in parts are there. It's more or less there in parts. Some parts of it's there in some parts of there. So ESG, what is trying to consolidate most of them. There are issues like, for example, in manufacturing, I can mention. Just a minute. So there are already many regulations and compliance standards which are already there. People are reporting because of mandatory requirement, but it's in some parts, as I mentioned. And ESG is something which is beyond the law of compliance, what I have understood. It's just not that you report what are the requirements, a tick a box, and we Erika also mentioned in the previous, also we spoke about it. It reflects the intent of the companies in terms of how serious they are as national citizens, how serious they are as a good corporate citizens. Is this something that they are doing something more which is just asking to do as a tick box? Because there is a increasing requirements on improving communities as a life and business seen as a part of the part of your not just that you're there for the purpose of business making, but how you're contributing to the overall community. So while we have CSR, then we have got the compliance with environmental standards, then we also have various other reportings, etc. You have to labor law compliance. Then when we talk about Indian context, of course you have industrial dispute acts, and of course now the new labor code has come up and all those things. But then, most of seen is a statutory compliance part. ESG, I think, to my intent, is more goes on, as I mentioned, the fiduciary duties of the director as a company, and how do you fulfilling those fiduciary duties, which is a duty of a trust beyond what is being asked to do from the law perspective. And I'm sure when we talk about there are different practices, there are cultural issues, there are cultural differences in the which the company operates, the organization operates across jurisdictions, how they look at it. So those becomes a critical aspect. And as we see, which we spoke also, that as we see the next 2 years, 3 years down the line, the business will mature enough and they will understand the importance. And one of the big things that will definitely drive is how the investors are looking at it, how the institutional investors are looking at it. And if they start giving importance, the over a period, it's just a matter of time. As I mentioned, SEBI has already made it mandatory for next year, financial year, and this year, of course, is voluntarily. And slowly, if you can see that trend happening, then it's just a matter of time that it becomes a, part of your DNA of the organization to do that.
We would be expecting the guidelines which the SEBI chief talked about to come in few months around ESG, and it would be, I think, COVID times had made people think. Erika, any particular examples, case studies you encountered because of COVID and leading into impact of ESG?
Yeah, so I think COVID's been harsh on the whole world, but I think that in the UK, it's stopped everything. So March last year, I suppose, was the last time that we were really able to get out and about. There were a few let-ups at points, but since the beginning of this year, for instance, since just before Christmas, so just before 25th of December, we have been unable to leave the house. We are unable to meet with anyone else in other households unless they comply with certain regulations. So the thing that companies have been focusing more on is what do they do going forwards, because some have had office space that they just haven't utilized in a year. And I think the ESG kind of part of that is, what are they going to do going forwards? And actually, is there a sustainable kind of benefit, an environmental benefit as a result of them saying, actually, we don't need these big offices anymore. We need smaller offices. We don't need to worry about having all this electricity and the like that is required in central London to be able to work as we have been. But I think when you look at employees and what they have experienced as a result of that, I think it's been mixed. I think Some companies have dealt with it very well, some less so. And I think that when you kind of look at, for instance, in the UK, there's law that says within England and Wales that you can apply for flexible working. But one of the key differentiators in the UK was that if your boss or ultimate decision maker decides that it's not worthwhile or the business cannot continue, you can't do it. Therefore, we were in a situation where people did have laptops, so they had computers, they worked off of an internet connection, but their boss said no. That is going to completely turn upside down how the world of work works, because we've done it for a whole year. So that's really going to change things. I think the other thing is, within the UK, there are a lot of health and safety regulations around your desk needing to be set up in various ways, and not to put strain on your back or whatever else, otherwise you can sue your boss or your company. But the interesting gap that I see there is that there are very few companies that have worried about setup of desks at home, and so now we've had people a whole year now working from home, and I'm interested to see how that all plays out in the kind of longer term, especially if they don't go back into the office. Are they going to do those same kind of desk analysis or kind of assessments that they have just not been doing? And there also hasn't been an assessment on people's working environment as well. So I think that that's something to watch.
Oh, great insights. And as we come towards the end, and as I did say at the start, we would have a guest speaker. I would just quickly introduce him. He had been involved in some contributions to certain legislations in the European Union on ESG, which we would see coming up in a few months or a year's time, and how would it impact Indian businesses. So I introduced Mr. Adam Smith-Antony, a quick introduction of his. Adam Smith-Antony is a solicitor, advocate, and a partner and the head of business and human rights at Omnia Strategy. Omnia Strategy is a law firm founded and chaired by Sherry Blair, CBQC, preeminent human rights counsel and wife of former British Prime Minister Tony Blair. In this role, Adam advises businesses and other clients on seizing opportunities and managing risks relating to ESG issues. Before joining Omnia Strategy, Adam enjoyed roles at a global law firm and at the United Nations, and worked in the in-house legal teams of Apple and Google. So I would request our organizers, Lex Witness. So yeah, Adam is there with us. Yeah, yes, Adam, quick views on the impact on Indian business with what's happening in the European Union.
Well, thank you very much, Sonal. Thank you to you and the organisers for the very kind invitation to join you, and good evening, everyone. Firstly, I really enjoyed the discussion up till now, and I've learned a great deal. So thank you to your esteemed panelists. Really, just in a couple of minutes, I'd like to build on some of those points that have been made by your panel around strategy. And in particular, Amber's and Zameer's points around regulation, fiduciary duties, and this new type of stakeholder capitalism and social purpose, with a focus on how the EU, from a regulatory point of view, will be driving a change in behaviours globally, both within and outside the EU, certainly, in my view, covering Indian headquartered businesses who are operating internationally. As a quick aside, just building on the point that Sonal, you spoke to Erika about right at the beginning on greenwashing, that is another area where the EU has a real kind of pace of change at the moment. And the three areas there maybe to look out for is the EU Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, which came into force on the 10th of March this year, the Non-Financial Reporting Directive, which will be known to many on this call, but is now currently under review by the EU with a view to improving its effectiveness, particularly looking at ESG matters, and the new taxonomy regulation, which is really aiming at that point Erika made around standardizing metrics in this area, particularly in the investment sector, so that people can compare apples with apples and know what people are talking about. But one area I really thought would be interesting for your group to be aware of is this push towards what is called human rights and environmental due diligence. It's an area that's not perhaps come up in the discussion yet today, but the idea of due diligence is not new to companies, of course, but the idea of focusing on impacts outside the business, on the very stakeholders that Zameer mentioned, is perhaps potentially transformative. So the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which was adopted by the UN in 2011, introduced, or at least made much better known, the idea of human rights due diligence, which is a process through which businesses should identify, prevent, mitigate, and account for how their actual and potential adverse impacts touch on the lives of people both within and outside the organization. Now, the UN Guiding Principles talk about the responsibility of businesses to respect human rights, which is very different, of course, from a legal obligation or liability. However, this global standard has now spawned many national and regional laws which crystallize that kind of non-binding guidance into hard law obligations. Across Europe and also outside of Europe, there have been a number of these different types of national laws. Some have focused on disclosure, and modern slavery is a particular example, and others have focused more recently on human rights due diligence. Only some have started to look at imposing sanctions and liability. The EU Commission, however, is currently working on something called the EU Sustainable Corporate Governance Initiative. And this was first announced by the Justice Commissioner in April of last year. He said that he wanted to make human rights and environmental due diligence mandatory across all businesses based and operating in the EU, so including those in India who have some kind of trade or provide services in the EU. He said he wanted to look at directors' duties, as mentioned earlier, and particularly to make sure directors are looking more long-term and taking into account the interests of the various stakeholders. He said it should have sanctions because, in his words, a regulation without sanctions is no regulation at all. He said it should be cross-sector, and he was mindful that it should probably include small and medium-sized enterprises, but that they might need some special assistance. So in Q2, so the second quarter of this year, we expect from the European Commission its first official proposal of what this legislation should look like. That will then be passed to the other two branches of the European Union internal governance, namely the European Parliament and the Council of the European Union. One of those two bodies, the European Parliament, has only last week, on the 10th of March, just adopted and published its own report, which includes recommendations and even a draft directive. Now, this has no power of its own, but is extremely interesting, given that this is what the European Parliament, so those lawmakers, are calling on the European Commission, which is kind of like the pseudo executive aspect of the EU, to put into law and to put into this proposal that we're including. The European Parliament's report is broad, it's very expansive, and it's been described by MEPs, so members of the European Parliament, as transformative and ambitious. In particular, it would, if it was enacted, require businesses, and again, businesses based in the EU or based outside and doing business in the EU, to have processes to identify and work on potential and actual impacts on human rights, environment, and also what they call good governance. So that would include bribery, corruption, improper involvement in politics, and illegal campaign contributions. And they're also looking at enforcement. So they say there should be liability mechanisms and the possibility to bring civil claims in national courts. So that is just an introduction, a helicopter view of what is coming down the track in the European Union. In terms of timeframes, I would expect us to have some idea by the end of this year whether the law will be in place and when. And we probably have a time frame, a lead time of between 3 and 4 years before companies are having to comply. But I think this will have a huge impact on how businesses conduct themselves.
It will be a huge, and I think European markets with the entire EU, it's a huge exposure for Indian companies who are there. You cannot be in the global economy without doing things with the EU. So I think great insight, Adam, and I would now get to the Q&A part. So with Lex Witness team, we start the Q&A.
We have quite a few questions.
Yeah.
First question that we have is, how do you hold unlisted private companies in cases of serious ESG violations, which are more violation of...
Sorry, your voice is coming muffled.
Can you hear me now, Sonal?
Yes.
Yeah. The question is, how do you hold unlisted private companies in cases of serious ESG violations, which are more violation of moral standards rather than legal standards, especially the unlisted MNCs operating in India? That's the first question.
Okay. So should I take it, or Zameer, Amber, Tagore, anyone wants to take that?
I can, so you can take it. I'll give something for the companies to think about before they do that in future. I can give one examples in terms of the number, what Adam spoke about due diligence. I have the numbers also with me that, companies are now subjected to due diligence and therefore the investment flows, and I'll give you the numbers. But while I give examples of foreign companies and foreign CEOs like BlackRock, I want to tell you that even Indian companies which are operating multinationally, their CEOs and company boards have given strong statement. I'll give you one example is Salil Parekh, who's the CEO and MD of Infosys. They have come out with ESG Vision 2030, and he says ESG is at the heart of our approach. I am delighted to launch our ambition for 2030 for these goals. In the area of environment, we are focused on preservation of our planet, climate change, water and waste. In the area of social, our emphasis is on the development of people, especially around digital talent, technology for good, diversity, inclusion, and energizing the communities we work in. So that's a strong message coming from the top. In terms of the checks and balances for the companies which don't follow this, as my friend pointed out in the question, the report of US SIF Foundation says investors are now holding $11.6 trillion in assets which are chosen according to the ESG criteria, which was at the beginning of 2018. So you can imagine how the numbers would have gone. So that's a checks and balance for the companies. Companies in future will have to adopt it. It's in the voluntary phase, but I see these guidelines becoming a norm to be respected and followed by the companies in favor of the environment, social, and governance. That's about me.
Yeah. Great input. And actually, you say if we are compliant to the laws of a land, like you have your environment laws, you have everything around labor, HR, all of it on social, governance, tax, Companies Act, we have all of it. And ESG is the superset, which I think I heard from everyone, that it's a very principle-based approach. It's a superset in which you have to be compliant to fit into that superset at the first place.
Yeah, one more suggestion could be, Zameer, many of the companies, though they are not listed, have started appointing the ombudsperson or a whistleblower committee that is having access to the external, and the definition that you have given is a wider definition of the stakeholders. Yeah. Stakeholder level has gone beyond the limits. Beyond. That's where whistleblower committee could be one of the options. I'm not saying that is every whistleblower complaint has been disclosed or not, but of late when the due diligence is coming up, this is one of the questions: how many complaints that you have received, how many complaints that you have resolved to the satisfaction of the complaint. These two questions are playing vital role for the upcoming investments.
Right.
Everybody is asking the same question, that how many number of questions that queries that you have resolved to the satisfaction.
In fact, Tagore, I was thinking the same thing. The gentleman has asked a very important question. Just imagine you're sitting across the table with SoftBank and they are asking you this question. Okay, you may lose an investment. So that's where we are raising the signal today. Thank you.
Yeah, though I'm not from the SoftBank SB Energy here, but generally as a matter of fact, every investor is asking.
Any investor, right? Right. Okay.
Next question that we have, Sonal, is don't you think there is a need for thinking about ESG and social aspects of employees at consulting firms and beyond listed companies?
Yes, is definitely the answer. I think no one would be debating on that. Definitely the S factor in ESG on social cohesion and fabric internally and with the external stakeholders of the company has to be there. And I would say in India, especially after the new Consumers Act, even that with the consumers, the law is in place and we need to do things correctly. We need to just do businesses rightfully in a principle-oriented manner. And we have got all these guidelines, which at the start I spoke about, the TCFD, UNSDG, IFC principles, great things which people do need to, and maybe adopt one particular set of principles which works the best out, and things could be great.
I think, Sonal, this would be quite in the market. I mean, we give examples that JP Morgan reports publishes that in the annual report. BlackRock CEO makes a statement in his letter to the stakeholders. I think so these are, if you see from a consulting point of view, if this is the seriousness and the core of it, I think today or tomorrow, this has to be adapted. So, okay.
Very clear. Yeah. The next question.
Thank you, Sonal. The next question is, how do you think we balance between ESG and business models? Primarily holding rights of gig workers will have an impact on existing business models. For example, Uber drivers being held to be workers impacts ride-sharing ecosystem.
Kiran, quick is the best thing on gig workers is the Californian legislation last year, which came in, AB5. Fantastic piece of legislation that how to handle that situation, how to do the test whether they are employees or an independent contractor. So that's very good. The UK example of the zero-hour contracts, which Erika talked about, those again. And definitely when it comes to ESG, again, all stakeholders, be it an independent contractor or an employee, if the principles are getting adopted, the rights will be upheld. Anyone wants to further contribute on it?
You spoke about Uber. I would say the same example for BP. I mean, where the oil spill and all those matters which came up. I think it's a similar situation. Company has to adapt to it. It's been a line. Walmart was facing the same situation. It had adopted at some point of time. In fact, they have started their sustainability program right from 2014 now.
Yeah, if you could derive this point, Amber was talking about 9 principles of BRR. One of the 9 principles is that well-being of all employees. If you take care of all employees, whether it could be a third party, consultant, on-roll, off-roll, it would be directly or indirectly taken care of that. The business model, if you adopt BRR, indirectly that BRR adopts the ESG concept, the business model adopts the BRR. That would be taken care of.
Their perspective. Yes, Akshay, I know we have crossed the time a lot. Any more questions?
Yeah, just one last question, Sonal. There are plenty of them. I'm just picking up the more important ones. this is especially for Erika, I guess. Is shareholder activism still playing a role in the UK on driving better governance?
Yes, it absolutely is. Yeah, shareholder activism, in particular, I suppose the large institutional investors are having a lot to say about it. I know that Zameer has mentioned BlackRock and others, and yeah, that continues to grow as more and more people are putting weight behind it. So it's not just words anymore. We have actually come out of that particular company and that particular investment that we had because we don't agree with what they're doing. So absolutely, yes, it's definitely driving behaviours. And obviously in annual general meetings as well, then that also comes up with those kind of smaller retail investors as well.
Thank you, Erika. Philip De Costa, would you like to ask a question live? I remember you had a live question request. Philip De Costa, would you ask your question live? Please raise your hand if that is the case. Otherwise, we'll conclude the webinar, sir. Thank you, Philip. Sonal, I think that's it. 1 second.
Philip has just raised his hand. If you could allow him to talk.
Mr. Philip, if you could unmute yourself and ask a question live.
Hi, Philip.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Excellent contributions by everyone, really illuminating. So my question was really, it's something that has been touched upon. In fact, Amber and Zameer touched upon it earlier, about whether ESG and this concept can become the motto or the mission of the company, as you mentioned, you give us some examples, and move away from a compliance function. So if we distinguish it from the CSR toll that companies treated it as, and make it a mission, a distinguishing feature, a real badge of honor. So that was really the question, and what impact that can have.
Amber, Zameer.
I think the badge of honor is a very right word you used. In fact, we are looking at those scenarios also. So suppose when you're thinking about divestments which are happening in the company, they were related to fossil fuels. So instead of having a badge of honor, if you see the opposite side of it, it's about stigmatizing the reputation of the companies, where it has health effects because of the tobacco, droughts due to climate change, redirecting investments towards transformational changes, which is a low carbon economy. So one of the examples which I can give you is that if you don't have this badge of honor, then you end up in a situation which happened for a Norwegian sovereign wealth fund, NBIM, which was dealing with 58 companies which were associated with palm oil, and that was having an impact on the deforestation. This got financial media, all attentions of the environmental campaigners, which was increasing pressure on irresponsible palm oil producers. And that's where you see that there is a divestment which happened from these businesses. So either you hold the badge of honor, go ahead with this, or you face the divestment point of view. It's about stigmatization. But corporates now have to be conscious that this is a good badge of honor futuristically to be honored with. That's my point. Thank you.
Yeah, it is futuristic.
Thank you.
Yeah, Counsel, you want to say something on this one?
Sonal, I just received a message from Mr. Amber Gupta. He had to excuse himself because of an urgent call.
Okay. No worries, no worries. So any more questions? Thanks, Philip, for that question, and hope so.
Good question.
Yeah, it was a good question.
That's it from our side, Sonal. I can now request you
to much for everyone. And if any other questions, I would request if the Lex Witness team can share with us, we could write in to those questions if we didn't have the time to answer it out here. Thanks so much to all the attendees of taking the time out on a Friday. And thanks to the panelists. Thanks, Zameer. Thanks, Erika. Thanks, Tagore. Thanks, Amber, and thanks, Adam, for being the special speaker for the great insights. And I would say this all wouldn't have happened. The great platform which Lex Witness provides for great discussions in the legal community. Thanks, Akshay and the team. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sonal.
Thank you so much, Sonal. Thank you so much, esteemed panelists. Wonderful to have your insights. Sonal, seeking your permission to end the webinar for everybody now.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.